There's a version of you that exists right now, in your mind, that decides almost everything about your life. How much money you believe you can make, what kind of relationships you think you deserve, how hard you're willing to work when nobody's watching, and how quickly you give up when things get difficult. That version of you isn't your body, and it isn't your circumstances. It's your self-image, the internal picture you carry of who you are and what you're capable of. And here's something most people never realize. You can change that picture. Not over years, not through some dramatic life event. In just 10 minutes a day, you can begin rewiring how you see yourself. And when that changes, everything else in your life starts changing with it. Today I want to walk you through exactly what those 10 minutes look like, why they work, and why almost nobody actually does this, even though it might be the single most powerful thing available to them. Let's start with a question most people never actually ask themselves. Where did your current self-image even come from? Think about it honestly. Somewhere along the way, you picked up beliefs about what you're good at, what you're bad at, what you deserve, and what's realistic for someone like you. Maybe a teacher told you that you weren't good at math, and 30 years later you still avoid anything involving numbers. Maybe a parent said you were the quiet one or the difficult one, and you've spent your entire life unconsciously living up to that label. Maybe you failed at something once, publicly, and decided right then that you weren't the kind of person who succeeds at that particular thing. None of these beliefs were chosen consciously. They were absorbed, mostly before you were even old enough to question them, and then repeated to yourself silently thousands of times until they became so familiar they started to feel like facts instead of opinions. This is the first thing you need to understand. Your self-image isn't the truth about who you are. It's simply the most repeated story you've told yourself. And repeated stories can be replaced with new ones if you're willing to do the repeating yourself intentionally, instead of letting old voices keep writing the script. It's worth pausing here to understand just how much influence this invisible self-image actually has, because most people drastically underestimate it. Two people can have identical skills, identical opportunities, even identical starting circumstances, and end up in completely different places in life, purely because of what they privately believed was possible for themselves. One person hears about an opportunity and thinks, that could be me. The other hears the exact same opportunity and thinks, that's not realistic for someone like me. Neither of them says this out loud. Neither of them may even be fully conscious of the thought. But that split-second internal reaction determines whether they lean in or walk away, whether they take the risk or play it safe, whether they raise their hand or stay quiet. Multiply that single moment by thousands of similar moments across a lifetime, and you start to see how self-image doesn't just influence your life, it quietly writes the majority of it, decision by decision, long before you consciously notice it happening. So what does this 10-minute process actually look like? It's simpler than you'd expect, but simple doesn't mean easy, and it definitely doesn't mean unimportant. The first few minutes are about getting brutally honest with yourself about the story you've been telling. Sit somewhere quiet, without your phone, and ask yourself what you actually believe about your own potential. Not what you say out loud to sound humble or realistic, what you actually believe, deep down, when nobody's listening. Do you believe you're capable of building real wealth, or does some part of you believe money is only for other kinds of people? Do you believe you're capable of being deeply loved, or does some part of you believe you have to earn love by being smaller than you are? Do you believe your best years are ahead of you, or does some part of you believe you've already peaked and it's all decline from here? These questions might feel uncomfortable, and that's exactly the point. Discomfort is usually a sign that you've found something real, something that's been quietly running your life from the background without ever being examined in the light. Once you've identified the story, the next few minutes are about deciding, deliberately, what story you'd rather be living by. This isn't about lying to yourself or pretending you're something you're not. It's about recognizing that the negative belief you've been carrying was never actually more true than a more empowering one. It was just repeated more often. If you've been telling yourself, I'm not disciplined, Ask yourself honestly whether that's actually a permanent trait, or whether it's simply a pattern you haven't interrupted yet. If you've been telling yourself, "I always fall short," ask whether that's really who you are, or whether it's just the conclusion you reached after a handful of setbacks that you never fully examined. This is where you start writing a new sentence to replace the old one. Not a fantasy, not empty positivity. A sentence that's actually more accurate than the one you've been repeating. Something like, "I am someone who is building discipline, one day at a time," or "I am someone who learns from setbacks instead of being defined by them." The goal isn't to trick yourself into confidence you don't feel. It's to stop accepting an old, outdated conclusion as if it's a permanent fact. The final few minutes of this daily practice are about repetition, actually saying this new belief to yourself, out loud if you can, with enough conviction that your mind starts to register it as real. This might feel strange at first, even a little silly. That's normal. Almost anything meaningful feels strange the first few times you do it, because your mind isn't used to it yet. But understand what's actually happening physiologically when you do this. Your brain doesn't just passively store beliefs. It actively reinforces whatever gets repeated most consistently, especially when that repetition happens with focus and emotion behind it. This is exactly how the negative self-image got built in the first place, through years of repetition, most of it unconscious. You're simply using the same mechanism, on purpose this time, in a direction that actually serves you. Now, here's where most people get this wrong, and it's worth addressing directly. Some people hear "change your self-image" and assume it means chasing some fake, hyped-up version of confidence, walking around telling yourself you're the greatest, ignoring your actual weaknesses, refusing to accept any criticism. That's not what this is. Real self-image work isn't about pretending you have no flaws. It's about separating your flaws from your identity. There's a massive difference between "I made a mistake" and "I am a mistake." There's a massive difference between "I haven't built discipline yet" and "I am someone who will never have discipline." The first version in each pair leaves room for growth. The second version locks you into a permanent identity based on a temporary situation. Successful people aren't successful because they never struggle or never fail. They're successful because their self-image survives failure instead of being destroyed by it. When something goes wrong, they ask, "What does this mean I need to do differently?" Instead of asking, "What does this prove about who I fundamentally am?" That single shift in interpretation is often the entire difference between someone who quits after a setback and someone who uses that same setback as fuel. Let's talk about why this matters more than almost any other habit you could build. You can have the best business plan in the world, but if your self-image says you're not the kind of person who succeeds, you'll unconsciously sabotage yourself before you ever get close to the finish line. You'll procrastinate right before the opportunity that mattered most. You'll accept less than you're worth because some part of you doesn't believe you deserve more. You'll surround yourself with people who confirm your low expectations because those relationships feel comfortable and familiar, even when they're quietly keeping you small. This is why some people can read every self-help book, attend every seminar, learn every strategy, and still stay stuck in the exact same place year after year. It's not because they lack information. It's because information alone doesn't change identity, and identity is what ultimately decides which actions you're actually willing to take consistently, especially when nobody's cheering you on and the results haven't shown up yet. On the other hand, when your self-image genuinely shifts, you don't have to force yourself to take better actions through sheer willpower anymore. The actions start to feel natural, almost inevitable, because they're simply consistent with who you now believe you are. Someone who sees themselves as disciplined doesn't need to talk themselves into working out. It's just what they do, because it fits the story. Someone who sees themselves as capable of building wealth doesn't panic and quit the first time an investment or a business idea doesn't work out immediately. Because failure doesn't threaten their identity, it's simply part of the process they expect to go through on the way to where they're headed. This is the real power of doing this work for 10 minutes a day. You're not just motivating yourself temporarily. You're slowly, deliberately rebuilding the foundation that all of your future actions will be built on top of. I want to be honest with you about something else too. This isn't a one-time fix. 10 minutes today won't undo 20 or 30 years of repeated negative self-talk. If you do this once and expect your entire life to transform overnight, you'll be disappointed, and you might even conclude that it doesn't work, when really it just hasn't had time to work yet. Real identity change happens the same way the old identity was built in the first place, through repetition, over time, until the new belief becomes as automatic and unquestioned as the old one used to be. Some days this practice will feel powerful, and you'll walk away feeling like a different person. Other days it will feel mechanical, even pointless, like you're just going through the motions. Do it anyway. The days it feels pointless are often the days it matters most, because that's when old, deeply grooved patterns are testing whether you're actually serious about changing, or whether this is just another thing you'll abandon once it stops feeling exciting. There's also something worth mentioning about the language you use with yourself throughout the rest of your day, beyond just these 10 minutes. Pay attention to how you talk to yourself when something goes wrong. Do you say, "I'm so stupid" when you make a mistake? Or do you say, "That was a mistake, here's what I'll do differently"? Do you say, "I'll never be good at this" when something is difficult? Or do you say, "This is difficult right now, and I'm still learning"? These small, seemingly insignificant phrases, repeated over months and years, either reinforce the old limited self-image or reinforce the new one you're actively trying to build. 10 focused minutes a day plants the seed, but how you speak to yourself in the other 23 hours and 50 minutes either waters that seed or starves it. It also helps to think about the people you allow closest to you during this process. Because self-image isn't built in isolation, it's constantly being reinforced or challenged by the environment you live in. If you're trying to see yourself as someone capable of discipline and growth, but you spend most of your time around people who mock ambition, dismiss effort, or treat any attempt at self-improvement as pretentious, you're fighting an uphill battle every single day. This doesn't mean you need to abandon everyone who isn't on the same path as you. It means you should be intentional about who you let speak into your identity, especially during the early, fragile stages when the new belief hasn't fully taken root yet. One more thing worth addressing, this work isn't about becoming arrogant, self-obsessed, or disconnected from reality. It's actually the opposite. People with a genuinely healthy self-image tend to be more humble, not less, because they don't need to prove anything to anyone. They're not constantly seeking validation because their sense of worth isn't dependent on external approval. They can hear criticism without collapsing because their identity isn't fragile enough to be destroyed by someone else's opinion. Ironically, the people who seem the most insecure, the most desperate for praise, the most threatened by other people's success, those are often the people with the weakest self-image, using confidence as a mask instead of building it as a foundation. Real self-image work makes you steadier, not louder, calmer, not more boastful, because you're no longer performing confidence for an audience. You're simply operating from a place of quiet, internal certainty about who you are and what you're capable of becoming. So here's what I want you to do, starting tomorrow morning. Take 10 minutes. No phone, no distractions, just you and your own thoughts. Identify one belief about yourself that's been quietly limiting you. Something you've repeated so many times it feels like fact instead of opinion. Write a more accurate, more empowering version of that belief, one that leaves room for growth instead of locking you into a permanent identity. And then say it to yourself, with conviction, as many times as it takes to start feeling less strange and more familiar. Do this again tomorrow, and the day after that, not because it will feel powerful every single time, but because repetition is how identity gets built, whether you're doing it on purpose or by accident. The person you become over the next year, the next 5 years, the next decade of your life, that person is being shaped right now in these small, quiet moments that nobody else will ever see. Nobody's going to applaud you for these 10 minutes. There's no audience, no recognition, no immediate proof that it's working. But this is exactly where real transformation happens, not in the dramatic, visible moments, but in the private, repeated decisions to see yourself differently than you did yesterday. 10 minutes a day. That's all it takes to start. Not to finish. Nothing this important finishes quickly, but to start. And starting, done consistently enough, is how every single meaningful change in a person's life actually begins.